Thank you for staying.
Yes.
Right. Thank you for staying with us on G20 Highlight. Now, Stephanie, we're getting into the ultimate part of our session or segment this time, and we're going to address about as we're facing the G20 presidency, we would like to know about the possible stance of G20 presidency Indonesia this time regarding the territorial disputes, involving its member and other countries for sure. When taking over the G20 presidency in December last year, Indonesia released a program centered on what was considered to be the biggest issue of the time, which is about global recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. But then, just 2 months later, which is in February this year, Russia, a member of G20, invaded its neighbor Ukraine. The war and its global economic impact have since dominated the global agenda.
So the G20 Leaders Summit next Tuesday and Wednesday is considered as a test for global leadership due to the ongoing war divisions between major powers and food insecurity. And how will this summit of the Group of 20, what kind of dynamic will the heads of state and government have to reach agreements on tackling global issues in the next few days? So let's discuss.
Let's discuss about this situation. Here with us, joining us today is Alexius Jemadu, an international relation expert, professor at Pelita Harapan University in Jakarta. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for joining with us. And
Thank
also,
you for having me here.
Right, sounds really good. And also, I Made Andi Arsana, the international territory expert from Gajah Mada University in Yogyakarta. Good afternoon, Pak Andi.
Hello, good afternoon. How are you, Mas Patrick?
Thank you for joining us. Right. Okay, right. I'm going to go to Pa Alexius first.
Right.
Well, we have plenty of summit. We have plenty of, where the head of nations, executive governments unite or gather in one summit. Let's say UNFCCC, and we also have APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, and other summits. How do you assess these these number of summits? How it contributes to the better world of climate change? Do you think?
Yes, I think each of these events demonstrates the urgency and importance of multilateralism in finding solutions to all the global issues and regional issues that we are facing. So there is a belief that only through multilateral cooperation nations can resolve all these problems together. And there is no one single country who can resolve these problems on its own. That's why we need to work together to find a common solution to all these problems. And you see that they still believe in the importance and effectiveness of multilateralism, because that's the only way how to deal with the complexity of all the global issues that we are facing. And secondly is that you see that all these important events, the summits, starting from what they have in Egypt and also in Cambodia and also in Indonesia and also in Thailand, you see that all these summits are held under an extraordinary circumstances because we are facing still the ongoing pandemic right now, and also the war in Ukraine. So it's not really easy how to come up with a definitive solution to the problems. And it is a real challenge for not only for Indonesia, but for all members of G20 2 days from now. So they are going to face a very tough challenge, how to formulate a common solution to all the problems that we are facing.
Right, so I'm going to go to Pak Andi. Pak Andi, we have numbers of summit. I've mentioned about it, APEC, about economic, and UNFCCC and other summits as well. how do you see, I'm going to ask the same question, how do you see these summits can contribute to a better world?
Thank you very much, Mas Arif. I think as second what Alex just mentioned, basically, we have 4 big summits happening in the region. With regards to, I would like to highlight, for example, the ASEAN Summit. Years ago, for example, when the same summit took place in
Right, right.
I'm sorry, I hope you can hear my
I think-
voice. Is that okay?
Pak Andi, well, we do apologize. We have a little technical issue, so we're going to try to connect with Pak Andi soon. Right. Well, let's continue with Pak Alexius
Alexia.
Jamado.
Yeah. So, Pa Alexius, as you also mentioned, with this All Summit, with these meetings happening around the world, and this is like a joint collaborations amongst countries around the world, right? So this is actually also in tune with our G20 tagline, where we say recover together, recover stronger.
Right.
So we would like to know, how do you actually highlight the result or the agenda of the ASEAN Summit, like APEC meeting and COP27, for example, based on the theme of this respective event?
Yeah, I think there is a strong interlinkage among the themes of these events, starting from the issue of climate change, of COP27 in Egypt, and also the theme that they have in ASEAN Summit in Cambodia. And 2 days from now, we have all these themes, 3 agendas in G20 summit. And all of them, I think, are expected to contribute to the resolving of the biggest problem that we are facing now, recovery from all this pandemic, COVID-19. And that's why they have to combine the resources that they have. For instance, in G20, this is the combination of the most powerful economies in the world. And whatever they decide in the summit is going to affect the life of all nations, all humankind. So it's very important, and we really hope that the state leaders have the courage to really face the problem as they are, because the problems are so complex, and there's no such thing as a pure economic problem or pure political problem. All this problem has the element of multidimensionality in each of them. So we hope that these leaders have the creativity and the courage to deal with them, and also respond to the high expectation of the people, that they would come up with clear solutions and concrete deliverables in their meetings, in order to resolve all the problems that we have now.
Right.
Right.
So we've been connected with Pak Andi again. Can you hear us okay, Pak Andi?
Hello, can you hear me, Mas Arif?
Andi, can you hear us okay?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Well, I can actually see your face. Right, Pak Andi, the same question. Numbers of summit, UNFCCC, COP, and other summits. How do you see these summits can contribute to a better world, Pak Andi?
Okay, I hope you can hear my voice now clearly.
It's
Mas
fine.
Arif. Okay, good. Thank you so much. I'm sorry about that earlier. It reminded us to what happened 10 years ago in Cambodia, for example, when ASEAN also had a summit there, and for the first time in history, Indonesia failed to reach the joint community in ASEAN. So I think that is something that everybody would remember. So I really hope that this will not lead to the same failure. That's one of my notes. Second, as I said earlier, Southeast Asia now under the spotlight. I think this is the time for the region really to contribute something significant to enhance basically the peaceful in the world. So with regards to G20 also and ASEAN Summit, also COP27. With the COP27, one thing that I noted here, if I may, we all agree that climate change and global warming is really a big issue that everybody agree there is something to address. But the issue is that only 20% of the population in the world really understand or really are aware of this process. So I think this is a challenge of educating people also to an extent. Thank you.
Right. You've mentioned about the outcome of a couple of summits and how it contributes to a better world. And how do you? I'm really sure that you've been following the G20 presidency of Indonesia. The latest information, things like that. How do you relate the outcome of other summits that you've just mentioned with the big theme of G20 presidency this time? Recover together, recover stronger.
Right. The topic, by the way, with regards to, for example, ASEAN and the coming G20 is very similar. Recover stronger together, all of those key issues. I think what we are going to do in Bali in the coming days will be culmination, if I may say, to a number of processes that we have done in different places. So I really think that we can never make them separable one to another. So what happens in Cambodia, what happens in Bangkok later on, and what happens in Egypt, for example, that will together shape how the world will see the most pressing issue that we face in the future. For example, with regards to climate change, that will not be able to be separated from other issues like food security and energy security, which is actually very closely related to what we are going to do in Bali in relation to energy transition, for example. Thank you.
Right. I'd like to come back to Pa Alexius
Right.
first. So, Pa Alexius, how does the G20, actually you see summit this in Bali, put itself among the other global events? And what do you think? Like, how special is it, especially it's under Indonesia's presidency this year?
Yeah, I think G20 summit in Bali has a lot of significance for the whole world, yeah, and in many aspects, it will contribute to the resolving all the problems that we are facing now. And as I said earlier, if these members of G20 manage to combine the resources they have, and they agree to come up with a collective solution to all these three agendas, I think it's going to impact the whole world in a very significant way, especially how to recover from this pandemic COVID-19. And there are a lot of concrete proposals made by the Indonesian government in order to be proposed to the summit, and we really hope that all those proposals will be accepted by all members of G20 because they are so important. For instance, mobilization of global fund in order to anticipate the future possibility of another pandemic. So to make the world more prepared in dealing with the pandemic that is going to happen anytime, and we cannot say until now that this pandemic will stop soon. Right. So there is still a possibility that we are going to face another pandemic sometime in the future. But at least through this summit, you see that under Indonesia's presidency, the world is made more prepared or knows how to anticipate if it happens again.
Right. So G20 presidency is the thing that we use to prepare to anticipate the future pandemic.
That's true.
Right.
In order to not to repeat what we call strategic surprise, yeah, in dealing with this pandemic, But I think the world is more prepared now, and especially when they accept all these concrete proposals put forward by the Indonesian government as president of G20, there are many good ideas and creative solutions. But one thing is required, that all members of G20 should put aside put aside their narrow nationalistic approach in order to give way to the collective effort that is so needed in order to resolve the problem.
Right. I want to go to Pa Andy. I'm really sure that you're following also the global challenges, and global changes, Pa Andy. And in your perspective, how do you see the position of, G20 presidency? What makes it so special in your perspective, Pa Andy?
Right. Now we are in a very interesting time, also very challenging time. First, we have pandemic, not yet over. Second, we have war. For Indonesia, especially, this is the first time for Indonesia, so this is certainly something that is very, very special. But what makes it even more special, I think, is first, I would like to repeat, first, we are in the situation that is not easy with regarding the war, for example, and also how to recover from the global pandemic. With that only, I think it's never in our very, very long time that we face this kind of situation where we have a global pandemic and also we have a war at the same time. So this is a very challenging time for everybody, not only for Indonesia. But on the other hand, this is because this is the first time for Indonesia. Indonesia is the only country in the Southeast Asia, right, to be involved in this G20. I think this is the time for Indonesia to be able to give some flavor or color of the Southeast Asia in how to deal with this kind of crisis or pandemic, for example. The three topics that we are going to discuss based on what Indonesia has decided, for example, the digital transformation and also energy transition and also global health. However, in my opinion, it is very interesting to observe that Indonesia or this G20 might need to see at least two missing topic here, which are energy security and also food security. This is actually following the crisis happening involving Ukraine and Russia. Thank you.
Right, Pandi. As we also hold this presidency of the G20 summit, so now as the group of 20, how big is the role of G20 addressing political problems in the world?
Naturally speaking, we know that G20 is actually designed for economy and finance. That's how we all understand. So I think it is wise to keep G20 to focus more on this economic and finance issue. However, we also understand that economy is actually one of the most important driving force or driving factor for the politics. So I think in this case, even though G20 should focus more on the economy, the politics situation of the world cannot be separated easily from that economic situation. So I think, like it or not, I think it is the time also for the G20 later on to touch upon the political issue, because that is what this group is actually are there for. I mean, even though, once again, I'm not saying that G20 should go into politics that much, because it is different from G7, for example. But it is surprising, if I may say, if G20 does not really touch upon any political issue, because that is really a real thing that we are facing now in the world. Thank you.
Right. Well, I'm just going to go back to Professor Alexius. Well, obviously, three pillars that have been, proposed in the G20 this time: global health architecture, digital economic transformation, energy transition. Do you think these three pillars can actually address the problems occur these days in the world?
Yes, I believe that if they can come up with a definitive solution to the problem 2 days from now, I think all those agendas can be very important to help the world get out of the crisis right now, because that is the most urgent thing that needs to be done after the summit. And there is such a high expectation that all these state leaders take the initiative and try to solve the problems according to the nature of those problems. So you see that even though we are talking about economic issues, health issues, green energy, etc., but they cannot remove the political element in the negotiation, in the diplomacy of all these issues. Even to come up with a clear solution to this problem is a political matter.
Okay.
Because they have to agree on it, you know. So that is politics. So I don't think that we can take all these issues as a, like I said before, as a pure economic or pure energy. No, international relations is always characterized by persuasion, agreement, how to come up with multilateral cooperation in order to combine all the resources and then addressing all these problems with the combined resources that they have.
Right. Obviously, well, G20 presidency about financial matters, right? But, relating this with the war occurs between Russia and Ukraine, do you think some sort of, you mentioned about political matters, do you think the political matters related to these two countries that are having war can be, hugely discussed or related within the G20 presidency, you think?
Yes, that's a good question, because we are under a very extraordinary circumstances right now, and this is going to be very challenging on Wednesday when they have to decide what kind of declaration they are going to make, because the world is waiting for their response to all this high expectation. And we just hope that Indonesia can, as president, navigate all these issues in a wise way, because we really need the engagement of these great powers, China, United States, Russia, because of their scale of their economies. Because if they fail to engage in the agreement that is going to be made, then I think we don't have much reason to be optimistic about the future. So the engagement of the great powers is very important, and we really need them. Without their participation, I don't think that we can expect much from G20 meeting. So the participation of, or the engagement of the great powers is indispensable, conditio sine qua non, is necessary, and we just hope that they have the, as I said earlier, they have the courage to put aside their nationalistic, narrow-minded, and then focus more on what we can do together as a community of the world right now.
Right. So let's come back again to Pak Imade Andi Arsana, the international borders expert, that I would like to ask questions. Can the G20, from your perspective, become more powerful or have like a stance in regard to territorial dispute involving the countries, members or its countries?
Yeah, this is very interesting. We understand that this is quite sensitive, very political also, while on the other hand, we believe that G20 is not supposed to be too political. But as I said earlier, we cannot really omit, or we cannot really ignore the political issue completely. Allow me to give you an example. ASEAN, for example, with non-interference, non-intervention principle, will never touch the issue of sovereignty, for example, of the members. However, when something happened between, for example, Thailand and Cambodia, border issue regarding the temple, you probably are aware of this. What Indonesia did at the time as the chair of ASEAN is basically to invite both parties to sit down together and then talk about it. So once again, even though ASEAN is not in a position to intervene, but ASEAN treat this group as friends, right? As friends, and then what do you do with your friends? Of course, you talk about anything in a frank way, in a honest way. Basically, this is what we do. This is what we want. We want you to be happy and also in peace. So I think this is something also that G20 can or should do, in my opinion. Of course, with a way that is not somehow, in violation to what they have been doing so far or what the rules that govern them. But it is not impossible for G20 also to touch upon issues like the territorial dispute or border issue. Once again, we can talk about this later on. How to do that is another story, but I think the good intention from this G20 to touch upon that, I think is acceptable in my opinion. Thank you.
Right. Pak Andi, well, I would love to hear probably some practical examples that, could be addressed via G20 presidency. You mentioned about territorial disputes. Would you please give us some, practical example that G presidency, well, a big one, you have to address this one because this is quite problematic, right? And the issue about territorial, I follow territorial issue as well, and sometimes not just problematic, sometimes for those who don't know the regulations, it can be really confusing.
Number one, I think, is education, Mas Arif. I'm a teacher myself. I think this is really a big issue in not only in Indonesia and the world. It is very easy for us to misunderstand the issue of territorial dispute. So it is easy for us to get emotional when it comes to a dispute like this. So when we are emotional and then our response is not proportional. So first one is education. Now, when we talk about education, I think this is the time for different countries, different members of G20, or even countries who are involved in the conflict in the region, let's say the South China Sea, as well to sit down together and talk about education. So we don't really talk that much about who owns what and how to deal with borders, but how to educate people about what happens actually. I think this is something that we can do. We actually have given a very good example about this. So if you remember clearly, for example, the managing potential conflict in the South China Sea, that is actually a workshop initiated by Indonesia. Professor Hasim Jalal was there, and he is still there now, to actually initiate how to talk between or among members or parties, not touching it from the political side, but from a more scientific perspective or a scientific aspect. Because when we talk about, for example, resource utilization, mapping of the seabed, satellite utilization for resource monitoring, for example. So these are less sensitive and less political. So if we can do it from this kind of perspective first, so I think it is then easier for us to touch upon the more political matters. So I think in this case, G20 or ASEAN in this case, really need to push how to approach this issue from a less sensitive or more objective aspects. Thank you.
Right, education is the key.
Yes, right. So when we talk about the South China, it's a really big issue itself between Indonesia and China. And then because we understand also these two countries have in fact a very strong economic ties. For example, the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed train project, in which, like President Xi Jinping is scheduled to oversee the trial run after the summit in Bali. So do you think this is just like a dynamic of like the diplomatic relations between the two countries?
Honestly, I really wish to think that way. This is not a serious problem. But I think, okay, this now I'm on a serious note. I believe that all parties in the region in the same position, that it is better for us to have a peaceful relationship than war. I think everybody would agree this. So in my opinion, we really need first to think about the the context, the scientific context of the conflict. That's why I want to repeat this again and again. What actually happened in the South China Sea, what areas or what lands are actually in conflict, which maritime areas are actually in conflict, because not all the space in the South China Sea is actually in conflict. So we really need to understand what is the magnitude of the conflict actually. Basically, I'm a geodetic engineer because I always tell story by showing people maps. So we really need to see the map of the conflict first. By understanding that objectively, I think that is how we will be able to come up with a more proportional response. So that's one. So once again, I really need to think. I want to think that this is not just, but it is, yes, it is a serious issue, but I don't think this will lead to a more serious issue like war, for example. So I don't see I don't see that coming. However, now this is my also personal opinion and also warning, if I may. We need to really calculate this carefully, because if we see the history, for example, the World War, for example, what happens at the time was like miscalculation. So I really encourage everybody not to miscalculate anything. Basically, what China is doing to assert his claim in the South China Sea, somehow I can understand, because that is what a country is doing when they have claim in general. However, we should really not miscalculate this. For example, how the citizen of Indonesia would respond to this kind of action, for example. How would the citizen of China would respond to this kind of action? So if, for example, we fail to anticipate that, if action, let's say from Vietnam or from China, from other countries in the South China Sea, can provoke the citizen of Indonesia, for example, considering that our netizen, we call it very active and sometimes reactive. So their reaction towards this kind of thing might push the government to do something that beyond what they have to do, for example. So this is, I think, an example of miscalculation. So I really hope that this will not happen. But once again, we really have that everybody will be able to sit down together. Maybe they need to sit down together, not by touching too much about the political aspect, but more an objective aspect, like a scientific aspect, how to collaborate scientifically in managing the resources in the South China Sea, for example. Thank you.
Right. I want to return to Professor Alexius.
Right.
You mentioned about a possibility, a big possibility for G20 presidency to talk about geopolitical issue, right? Do you think that Indonesia these days is, in this presidency is under pressure because they included Russian delegate, in this G20 presidency, considering the war happens between Russia and Ukraine? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you are right that Indonesia has been under great pressure from some countries not to invite Russia to this summit. But I think as president of G20, Indonesia is supposed to invite every member. But the problem is that what they are going to discuss when Russia is here, that is the real challenge. And this is going to characterize the whole meeting that we are going to have on Wednesday. And I believe that some countries will insist that there should be some statements about what is happening in Ukraine. And the challenge is whether Russia can accept that. That is the challenge. And we cannot say for sure at the moment what is going to be a product of this summit. There are, some element of uncertainty and unpredictability of what they are going to discuss. But having said that, I think we should keep our optimism that the enthusiasm of all these state leaders, 17 out of them are committed to attend the summit. And this is a good news because the state leaders are still enthusiastic to capitalize on the reliability of G20 in order to address all the issues that we face together now. So there is an element of unpredictability, but at the same time, I think we should keep our optimism that the leaders will have their wisdom in order to give priority to the resolving all the problems that we had put in the agenda of the G20.
Right, so we should put some sort of optimism to the leaders
Right,
of the G20
yeah,
presidency. And we still have more things, interesting ones coming up. We're going to have a little break after this one. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching our special segment, G20 Highlight. And we're addressing the issue about territorial and also political, world political issues. And here with us this time in the studio, we have Alexius Jemadu, an international relation expert professor from Pelita Harapan University, and also joining us via Zoom video conference is Pak Imade Andi Arsana, international border expert.
So, Alexius, I would like to actually add on to what Pa Andi previously, before the comms break, talked about the diplomatic relations between China and Indonesia. Perhaps you would like to add something on that.
Yeah, I think China and Indonesia play very important role, not only in G20 but also in Southeast Asia. China represents the second largest economy in the world, and Indonesia is believed to be a traditional leader of ASEAN. So Beijing and Jakarta play a very important role in ensuring the stability of this region. And the second thing is that economic cooperation between Indonesia and China has reached a point of no return. You know, the economic engagement with all these infrastructure projects that financed by China. So I'm not saying that there is no disagreements or conflicting interests between the two countries, but it is better for them, for the sake of this region and for the sake of the world as a whole, related to the topic of this G20, that the two countries should work together and focus more on what China and Indonesia can do together. Yeah, because two of them are expected to lead other countries, in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, in order to promote the narrative of economic interdependence. Okay, and the third thing is that don't forget, the institutionalization of this cooperation, to RCEP, Regional Economic Comprehensive Partnership, ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement, ASEAN Infrastructure Investment Bank. So there are a lot of institutions that have been created in order to facilitate this cooperation. That's why I said earlier that it has reached a point of no return. And it is good for the two nations to work together. The more they cooperate, the more they combine, their collective effort to deal with the problems here in this region, the better for all parties. And that's why through this summit, Indonesia and China should work together to to promote all these three agendas of the G20, so that they can come up with concrete solutions. Yeah, and I think Indonesia's leadership has played a very important. Indonesia has done a lot in making sure that there will be concrete deliverables that Indonesia can offer to the world. Yeah, in order to face the uncertainties of the world in the future.
global challenges, uncertainties.
Yeah.
It seems like we're going to have plenty more.
Yeah, but I think I should add one more thing. Forum like G20, they are not authorized to address issues like territorial disputes. It's not their core business. Even if they touch issues like that, it will in the form of very general normative statements. Yeah? And I don't think that G20 is a good forum where all the territorial disputes, like in South China Sea, will be discussed. And China would be the first to reject that proposal because what China prefers, as far as I know, is that in order to resolve the territorial dispute in South China Sea, China would prefer to have one-on-one, not in a multilateral forum, either in G20 or ASEAN. No, China would reject that idea, yeah, because China prefers to talk about it only on one-on-one with the climate states in South China Sea.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So the focus, actually, the main focus of this G20 is not really talking about the political side, as you mentioned.
Yeah, no, they are not meant
not
to
there.
talk about political matters directly, but they cannot avoid the political ramifications of these issues. And as I said earlier, in international relations, we learned that in order to come up with an agreement in international meeting like this, it's also a political issue, you know, because in international relations there is no authority above the state. Each of them has their own sovereignty. So the only way to come up with an agreement is negotiation, diplomacy, persuasion. You know, you have to have a strong argument in order to persuade the other side to agree with you. And there is a lot of political process in doing that. Yeah, so that is what I mean by saying that politics is always there, you know? And countries have their own power in order to affect the outcome of any international meeting. It is a matter of their power and their resources. And that is why the engagement of these great powers is very important. Yeah, very important. United States, China, and Russia, they have to engage in this collective effort to deal with the problems.
Yeah.
Right. I want to go to Pa Andy. Can you hear me okay, Pa Andy?
Yes.
Right. It seems like, as mentioned by Professor Alexius, the geopolitical issue, seems unavoidable to be discussed in hidden way in G20 presidency. I want to relate this, with the current situation. Indonesia or G20 presidency obviously included Russia or Russian delegates, if you like, to attend G20 presidency. And it seems like some of the member countries have angered to Indonesia, if you like my word, have angered to Indonesia and challenged the decision. How do you see the position of Indonesia with this kind of decision? This is going to be interesting.
Thank you. I think it is quite clear that Indonesia is not in an easy position in this case. On one hand, we can understand why other countries might prefer Putin not to come, for example, which is now actually the reality. But on the other hand, I think I agree with what Pa Alex just mentioned about the position of Indonesia as the chairman of G20. This is the right thing to do, actually. So in order for Indonesia to show to the world its neutrality, its firmness in leading this organization, this is actually the right thing to do. So invite everybody because everybody has the same right to attend the forum. I think I just discussed with colleagues from Australia, for example. In terms of country, Australia might not really like what Indonesia is doing regarding with regard to inviting Putin, but being an academic, he really respects the position of Indonesia to do this, and also even though we understand that a lot of leaders in the world would not be so comfortable to be in the same forum or even in the same Zoom meeting with Putin, for example, will be quite difficult for them. So, but once again, what Indonesia is doing is the right thing. So, first, to show the neutrality, the firmness, the fairness of Indonesia. Second, also to keep this G20 as uh, a forum for economy, not for politics. So I think this is the right thing to do. You know, imagine if Indonesia, for example, did not invite Russia, and then there's a confirmation by Indonesia to some extent that G20 is no longer neutral or no longer for economy, but it is actually going into politics. So I think this is something that Indonesia is right about doing, inviting Putin to the forum, even though once again we know all understand that Putin will not come to the forum. Thank you.
Let me come back to Pa Alexius here.
Yeah,
so
right.
we know that there will be 20 country leaders coming, but some of them, like a few country leaders, won't be coming or appear here. So with only perhaps like 17 countries, excluding like, for example, Brazil or Mexico, or like other countries as well. So what do you think about the results? Will this impact the results of this G20 summit?
Yeah, first of all, let us see what they are going to decide on Wednesday. If they manage to produce a communique, yeah, it will be a great news, and it will demonstrate the success of Indonesia's leadership. And we would welcome that result in a joyful way, because under such extraordinary circumstances, you can produce such thing. It is really a great achievement. But I don't think there is a high likelihood of that thing to happen. Considering the geopolitical problems that we are facing now, it is so it is so difficult to to remove the political element of all this discussion. Let me give you an example. If you are talking now about the issue of global supply chain for the strategic commodities like food, energy and fertilizer, yeah, without resolving the conflict in Ukraine, yeah, how can you deal with these economic issues like energy, food?
Yeah.
So you see that these political and economic issues, the intersection is so clear, yeah, that countries are supposed to face them together, yeah, to deal with these problems according to the nature of those problems. They have to recognize that these problems are complicated. Yeah? There is an element of political conflict in those problems, and there is also economic, social, and environmental consequences as well, ramifications. Yeah? And that's why they have to really, use their creativity in order to answer and respond things in effective way, so that the people with very high expectation that they could produce something concrete out of the summit, because the cost of the summit is so expensive, and we use all the money of the taxpayers, right? And they deserve to have a good answer to all the problems that they have. And they put all their expectation to all the state leaders, and they have to think about that.
Yeah. So it has been confirmed. Actually, there are 3 countries that have been confirmed are not coming to the summit. So they are like Russia, we already know, like Brazil and Mexico. So what do you think? Professor Alexius, we would like to know if there are any like expectations actually from these countries who are not attending this summit.
Yeah, I think although their state leaders do not come to Bali to attend this summit, I hope they still support Indonesia as the current ongoing president of G20 to navigate all the discussions during the summit, and give Indonesia opportunity, to demonstrate its wisdom, its neutrality, and also its willingness to do something good for the world, as mandated by the preamble of its constitution, to participate in the construction of world peace. So we hope that those three countries will give their full support for Indonesia as the host, to preside over the meetings and also to come up with the real concrete deliverables that people are waiting until now.
Right. Well, I want to return to Pak Andi again. The latest information, Pak Andi, only 17 countries. Russia, latest information we got, Russia, Mexico, Brazil will not attend the G20 presidency. How big do you think, with the absence of these three countries, can actually influence the outcome of G20 presidency?
We see this as a problem because people relate this to Russia-Ukraine issue. I think that's why the absence of Putin becomes really big. But when we see it from a different way, 20 leaders, 13 do not come because they have their own very important issue in their country. I think this can be seen as something acceptable. That's my first statement. However, because once again, this is going to be okay. People say, for example, the G20 will be overshadowed by the issue between Russia and Ukraine, which I think will be true. Somehow it is true, even though we understand it is very political, while on the other hand, we understand that G20 is supposed to be non-political. So this is going to be an effort or a challenge for everybody to balance this, how to keep this G20 focusing on the economy and finance, while they cannot really ignore completely the issue that matters, like Russia and Ukraine. So I think this will be an issue somehow, because to talk about Russia without Putin being there is probably essentially different compared to talking about Russia while Putin is there. So somehow, in terms of feeling, the legitimacy might decrease a little bit, but legally speaking, nothing will be bad or will be wrong about this, because it is not for the first time we have a number of head of countries do not come to a forum like this. So I think yes, issue will be there. I mean the discussion about the Russia, for example, and Ukraine might not be the same, but I think in terms of legitimacy, the result of this forum will still be very high. Thank you.
Right, and obviously we know together that this forum, G20 presidency, is focusing on financial matters, right? But the other forum seems like doesn't really result like the one that we just had, the latest one. For example, the meetings of foreign affairs ministers, finance ministers, and ended up with no formal communique, right? That one. And I would like to know how optimistic you, Pak Andi, that this G20 presidency can be quite successful to address the world's issues.
Right. Yeah, I said earlier, like G20 is more on economy, but politics can never be completely separated from the economy. I think we all aware of this. So I think it is quite acceptable that the G20 agenda is also affected somehow by what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, for example, or South China Sea probably. Even though I agree once again with Professor Alexius about yes, we are aware of this problem, but talking about that problem officially in the G20 might not be a wise decision. But once again, we might want to also touch about this. So with regards to that, once again, I think in this case, Indonesia should really play a significant role how to balance this. Okay, once again, if I may say, focusing on the economy, but touching upon the sensitive political issue. So this is actually in line with what we are going to do in APEC in Bangkok, right? The topic is open and also balance in one of the themes. Like, so balance in this case is balancing everything. So I think this is the time for everybody to rethink about the organization, rethink about the way they operate. And if things happen, extraordinary things happen, and it is not impossible for all the members to have also an extraordinary or different approach in terms of operating their organization or convening the forum like this. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, right. So I'd like to ask about Alexius. So just to add to what Pak Andi just said also, how do you think, what are the challenges for Indonesia itself to balance, like Pak Andi also said, it's about balancing, right? Balancing that this won't be too political, but because we have to, you know, like everything taps in one another, like intersection you mentioned also earlier, right? So how we are not being too political, but still addressing the objective of the G20 itself?
Well, it is not going to be easy how to formulate that in a way that is acceptable to everybody. But I think Indonesia should also convey its clear message, the moral standpoint in all these issues. Yeah. First, of course, as president of G20, we need to invite Russia because we do not have any authority to, to exclude anyone from the meeting. But at the same time, I think also for the sake of the credibility of our role in international politics, we should also, and this is my personal opinion, that the Indonesian government should also communicate to the world how to create international order based on the effectiveness of international law. The problem for the G20 that we are going to have on Wednesday is that there is a possibility that some countries will use this forum to draw the attention of the world to the fact that Russia should be blamed because it has created a kind of precedent in international politics that a sovereign country can be invaded, based on the power that it has. So there is one possibility. So we have to anticipate this possibility that these countries wants to use the meetings on Wednesday to draw attention to the world. Look, we have to blame Russia because Russia has created a precedent that will jeopardize the effectiveness of international security by invading another sovereign country. So there is a possibility. And the second possibility, they will not produce any communique at all. And what is to be done if that happens? I think we should give more input to the Indonesian government to come up with a statement of leader of or president of G20 to say that we regret that no communique is produced, but at the same time we should also keep this enthusiasm for multilateralism, keep it alive, because that is the only hope for the future of the humanity, that multilateral cooperation is the best approach in order to deal with these complicated problems we have.
Right. We still have Pak Andi here and Pak Alexius joining us in the studio. So I'd like to ask these questions also to, first of all, to Pak Alexius, and later perhaps Pak Andi could also add. Right. So Indonesia's, the issues raised by Indonesia, which are health, digital transformation and energy transition, will get the results at the end of the summit? What do you think? Will we get the results by the end of the summit?
Yeah, it depends on whether they agree to have this collective statement. that represent the voice of all members of G20. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
So if they fail to produce such communique, then things would be more complicated. And I would suggest that Indonesia has to make its own statements, telling the world that over the last, several months, we have done our best to give all these concrete deliverables. It is now depend on the world to accept those proposals that made by Indonesia. And I think Indonesia has proposed very good proposals. Yeah, in the financial issues, in also the how to anticipate the future pandemic.
Yeah.
It is it will be very unfortunate if the world do not appreciate these good ideas.
Right. So
Especially as far as developing countries are concerned, I think Indonesia has done a good job in representing the interests of these developing countries, so that there is kind of affirmative action when we deal with the pandemic, because they don't have enough resources to deal with another pandemic.
we don't have enough resources.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to go to Pa Andi again. Obviously, Pa Alexius said, in order to make a good summit, Indonesia presidency needs to produce communique, for the world, for a better world. And do you think that this time's presidency, having the three issues, which are digital transformation, energy, and health infrastructure, can actually, address and resulting good summit at the end, considering, the absence of three countries and geopolitical tension, with these three issues, do you think, Pa Andi? Hello, Pa Andi? Right. Okay. Right. I want to return to what has said by Pa Andi, Pa Alexius. Pa Andi said, well, the position or the decision of Indonesia to include or to invite Russian delegates in this time's G20 summit is the right decision to show neutrality of Indonesia. I would like to hear some words from you about this.
Yes, I think Indonesia has to invite Russia, but at the same time, do not give the impression that you are neutral in some moral issues, in some issues that related to the the enforcement of international law, because that will determine your credibility as a member of international community. So I personally would suggest that we do two things. We give invitation to Russia, and we are supposed to do so because every member deserves to to attend the summit. But the second thing, we should also tell the world what is our moral standpoint if certain international law is violated. Because you have to have your standpoint in those issues. If you stay silent or indifferent about that, then people will raise a lot of questions. What is actually your position, knowing that there are some civilians who are, killed in the war, and there is one country whose sovereignty has been violated? Those are important things, to determine the future of international order. And I think we should tell the world what is our position in those things. So two things, invitation, yes, but then you have to also to tell the world where is your moral standpoint in all these issues related to the importance of international security. And if you go back to the UN Charter, UN Charter was established precisely to prevent such things like in Ukraine, from happening. Because they are not going to, at that time, the United States and allies who gained the victory during World War II, what they wanted to do is to, once and for all, to prevent the repetition of what Germany had done in Europe and what Japan had done in Asia. And it's very important for international security. And that is what they call in UN Charter the principle of collective security. If I invade your country, then it means that you invade all other countries. And that is against international law. It is unacceptable. Yeah? And I think we need to have our clear position regarding, in fact, we have done that when there was a voting in the UN, right? And it is good, because then people know your commitment to international peace. So yes, we are supposed to be neutral, but at the same time, we also need to tell the world what is our moral standpoint in some critical and global political issues.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I would like to greet again Pak Andi.
Yes.
Seems like
So
Pak is
I think we've connected again to Pak Imade Andi.
Can you hear us fine, Pak Andi?
Pak Andi, can you hear us?
We
clearly?
couldn't quite hear your voice, Pak Andi.
Okay. Can you hear me
Now
now?
it's fine.
It works now.
Right.
All right.
Apologize for the technical issue, Pak Andi. So if you would like to add some point from what Pak Alexius here already said about Indonesia, we have to have this like a moral standpoint. So if you would like to elaborate, give your point on that, please.
Thank you. I agree with what Alexius just mentioned. I would like to add a little bit more about the result, because that's how I wanted to say before. With regard to what is the possibility for this G20 to produce any result? In my opinion, that will highly depend on the topic that we are going to put in that communique. So if, in my opinion, all the members really focus into the less sensitive topic or less political topic, like the three topics that we just decided already, which is global health, and then energy transition and digital transformation, I think those are less sensitive, and then it is a lot easier for the members to reach the agreement or joint communique. But if they are going to put other sensitive issues like territorial dispute, for example, or Ukraine-Russia thing, that might make it more problematic than for the members to reach the agreement. So I think this is my position on the possibility for the G20 to produce results. Now, with regards to the moral standpoint, I agree, Alexius. Even though, for example, this G20 failed to produce any official result or agreement or joint communique, I think Indonesia should really show the world, because as Alexius already mentioned clearly, that we have done a lot in preparation or in our way in paving the way towards the result of this forum. But then it is now up to the members, up to the world actually, how to respond to what Indonesia has done. So we really hope that they will also see this in addition to achieving something good, but also to give some respect to what Indonesia has done by agreeing something that is matter actually to the world. Once again, the strategy that Indonesia can play is to try to avoid or to minimize actually the political issue that will be put into the result. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pak Andi. And then Pak Alexius, Indonesia's decision, this is continued to what you said also earlier. So Indonesia's decision to keep Russia on the G20 invitation list, which showed the world that its non-alignment commitment actually will not give into the great powers' pressure. Instead, the country can be a strategic middle power and gain trust from the warring parties. So the question is now, how big is Indonesia's role or power in addressing the conflict?
Okay, that's a good question. The role of mediator in international conflict is determined by three things. First, the willingness of Indonesia to engage and to mediate the conflict. So Indonesia is willing to do that. And in fact, Indonesia has demonstrated that willingness by President Joko Widodo by visiting Ukraine and Russia in the middle of war. So there is a willingness to mediate. The second thing is the issue of acceptance. Whether such role is accepted by by Russia and by Ukraine and by United States and all allies. Yeah. Do they really want that Indonesia should play that role? This also determine how Indonesia can play such role. So the acceptance of such roles by others, by the conflicting parties. And the third thing is determined by Indonesia's capability, Indonesia's negotiating skill, diplomatic skills, in order to be an honest mediator, to really work for them and to find the solution of those problems. Now, if we go back to those three factors, you can really figure out how big our role in mediating the conflict that is going on in Europe now.
Right.
So that is the answer. Three things: willingness, capability, and acceptance.
Acceptance, right.
Yeah.
I want to go to Pak Andi again. Well, Pak Alexius has mentioned about being a mediator, for Russia and Ukraine. Do you think, this is the best time for Indonesia to take advantage of this summit to be a mediator for? I think this would be an ideal one to mediate the conflict.
Thank you. Whether or not Indonesia will use this forum as a place or media for this, I think that subject to discussion, because we discussed already about this, how we be really careful about utilizing this forum to touch upon these political matters. However, in G20 in general, while Indonesia is now a leader, I think it is wise for Indonesia to exercise this, to explore the possibility. Thank you very much, Pak Alexius, about the 3 points. I really am enlightened by that. First, with regards to willingness, I think I would like to repeat, President Joko Widodo has visited Russia and Ukraine in the midst of war. I think that is actually a demonstration of willingness. I think nobody would contest that. With regards to the capability, and I would like to comment on this. I would like to repeat what I just mentioned earlier. When Indonesia served as the chair of ASEAN, Indonesia actually was quite active in encouraging Thailand and Cambodia to talk and to sit down together to discuss about their conflict in the Prehvihar, the temple, conflict among of the temple. I'm sorry. So that, I think, is demonstrated already the positive capability of Indonesia being a good mediator. Even though with regard to result, of course, it can take a really, really long time. We certainly agree with this, that conflict between Russia and Ukraine is certainly not an easy thing to handle. Conflict between Thailand and Cambodia also the same. But at least Indonesia should step up and do something real to demonstrate its willingness, just as Alexius mentioned, to basically promote peace in the world. So I think this is a good moment for Indonesia. Once again, I agree with that. But how Indonesia is going to do that in Bali, that is maybe something that we need to discuss further. And I think Indonesia, with Bu Retno and Pak Jokowi, already have their own strategy how to do that best, in order not to jeopardize actually a bigger agenda of this G20 forum. Thank you.
Right, such a very powerful message from Andi about promoting peace, and I'm really sure as well that this opportunity can be used by Indonesia, taking advantage of this summit. And right, Michelle?
Yes.
We still have more things to know from Professor Alexius.
So Professor Alexius,
Yeah.
if I could say, then we actually already have that moral standpoint, actually,
Right.
Indonesia, right? As you said, there's the three things like willingness of Indonesia and
Right.
acceptance, and also the capability and the diplomatic skills that we have, right?
Yeah.
So, how does Indonesia, do you think, deliver on leadership as in its G20 presidency amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Right. What I would imagine right now that on Wednesday there will be a strong insistence from some members that a statement should be made out of this summit to say something about the war and all its political ramifications and all its economic impacts. Because according to those countries, this is the gate to resolve other problems. And if that is the case, then Indonesia would be in a kind of dilemma, yeah, whether to follow along the wish or aspiration of these countries, or Indonesia should stay in the middle and try to formulate a kind of neutral statements in order to to satisfy everybody, yeah, because that is the nature of this forum. You cannot impose certain things on other countries. They have to agree everything together. And this is going to be a kind of difficulty for us. But I believe that the Indonesian government, the president and also Minister Retno, have anticipated this. Should this happen on Wednesday, I think they know what to do, yeah, because they are already calculate all different scenarios that might happen on Wednesday. But I think that Indonesia should make its own statements, yeah, without sticking to the the idea that the summit should produce a communique. Indonesia should have its own statements as a president of G20.
Right. Indonesia has to produce communique to make the successful.
Not communique, because communique should produce together. Indonesia should make its own statement as
should make their
a
own
president.
stance.
Yeah.
Right. Indonesia should make their own stance. Stephanie, we still have more things to come from Pak Alexius for sure, and also Pak Andi. But before that, we're going to have a little break. We will be right back. We've discussed, Stephanie, we've discussed the more specific issues this time about territorial issues, international politics related to G20 summit. Now, I want to go to to Pak Andi again. Pak Andi, can you hear us fine?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right, Pak Andi, we've discussed some detailed issues, about I've just mentioned. Now, we would like to hear your final comments, or basically what do you expect from this G20 summit?
All right. I think we mentioned earlier a little bit about the possibility to have some result, which I think the possibility is there, but depending on how wise the member will be trying hard not to, or to put some political issue in that result or agenda. I think that would be the defining factors. I mean, for me, I would like to repeat, because I agree with Alexius about, even though, for example, we or the group could not come up with formal agreements like a communique, I think this is a good time for Indonesia to mention or to state its own position. So having done all of this hard work, really hard in my opinion, about how to pave the way to a better world, if I may say. And then I think Indonesia deserves all the opportunity to say this once again to the world, But I really hope once again that the world will understand the situation and support Indonesia in producing something concrete, basically, out of this forum. That's first. Second, however, I think also we have some challenges later on how to implement this result, whatever result that we are going to come up with. First, because this G20 is not a formal organization. It is basically an informal. It is basically a group of like-minded countries or leaders. So they don't really have any legal force or power for the implementation. So I think this will be the next challenge for us. So even though we managed to have something or a good agreement, which I think is a good already, but then the challenge will be how to ensure the implementation or the application of those results. Thank you.
Right, Pa Andi, thank you very much for your statement. And Pa Alexius, as we have come to the end of the program, so perhaps you would like to say a few words about our discussion today.
Yeah, I want to say a few things. First of all, yes, we are facing very big challenges ahead of us, but we should keep our optimism and we should capitalize on our own effort inside the country. And I think Indonesia has demonstrated what they call leading by example. Yeah, for instance, how we recover from the pandemic. Indonesia, stands out as one of the countries with relatively high economic growth and control over the spread of the pandemic, and also the use of all these electric vehicles during the summit. It is a symbol of commitment to green energy. So let us be realistic, let us moderate our expectation, but at the same time we need to keep our optimism, because multilateral cooperation is the only way ahead for all humanity.
Right. That's such a nice way to leave our conversation with this topic. Thank you very much, Pa Alexius and Pa Andi, for joining us live via Zoom video conference. Hopefully, this summit can be a successful summit as you both expected.
Right.
And so that's it. We've come, Stephanie, we've come to the
end of our
concluded the discussion, the interview today. And hopefully the information, the discussion today can provide you some insightful information and enlighten you, especially about territorial issue that becomes really confusing.
So yeah, so that wraps up our G20 highlights for today.
Right, and I'm Muhammad Arif Ismail.
And I'm Stephanie Silitonga. Thanks for watching.
Goodbye for now.